Welcome to Learn Community Education webinar. I'm Tina Barnett of Elderberry Care, and I'm a board member of Learn. I'm here on behalf of Dee Childers, who is with Life Changes Elder Care Consulting, and she's a vice president of Learn and Community Education Chair. And today our topic is elder abuse, awareness and prevention with Alyssa Groen, Assistant Project Manager of Nampa Family Justice Center. Many of you know about Learn, but in case you don't, what is Learn? And Learn is a lifelong education and aging resource network. And it's an Idaho-based nonprofit organization with a mission to provide community education on aging and caregiving topics. And Learn is a leaders network of the Society of Certified Senior Advisors, and SCSA is an organization that educates and certifies professionals who work with seniors. This content that you'll hear today is provided for general information purposes only and is not to be considered legal, financial, or health advice. So consult with your legal, financial, health care, or other service providers before taking action based on this information. So today's sponsor, today's speaker is Alyssa Grohn, and she is the Assistant Project Manager at Nampa Family Justice Center, NFJC. She's been with NFJC since 2016, starting as an advocate, then moving to the Elder Project Coordinator, and then to her current position, where she helps manage all the NFJC grants, center statistics, and runs the Elder Abuse Program. Prior to this, Alyssa worked as a contracted case manager with Family Connections Incorporated, working with families involved with child protection services, and as a program director in the developmental disabilities field of social work. Alyssa graduated with a bachelor's of social work from Dordt University. Did I pronounce that right, Alyssa?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Dordt University in Sioux Center, Iowa, and is currently is a licensed social worker in Idaho. And before we start, I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsors for our current education series of webinars: Oasis Senior Advisors and A Mind for All Seasons. So without these sponsors, we wouldn't be able to bring you this really valuable content. So without further ado, I'm going to shift over and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, Alyssa, and I'll let you share yours.
Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yep, that's great.
Perfect. So I want to talk a little bit about the Justice Center, just to kind of give you just a really brief introduction of what we do here. We are under the Justice Center concept. So we have a group of partnership agencies that work under one building. So we serve victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, child abuse, elder abuse, and human trafficking. And our goal here is to promote safety, self-sufficiency, and hope and healing to those affected by abuse. So all of the services that we offer here are free. Some of the other agencies that are located in our building is Adult Protection Services. There's Child Protection Services. We have Nampa Police Department. The Person Crimes Unit is in our building. We also have Idaho Legal Aid. We have counselors. We have several different types of counselors. So we have some that take Medicaid, some that take private insurance, and then we have intern counselors that are going for their master's in a master's program, and they can do some counseling for free. We also have probation and parole and the prosecuting attorney's office. So having all these agencies in one location makes it really easy to collaborate, and also for victims. So instead of having to go all across town in order to get services, they can come to one location. So in 2011, we actually got our first abuse in later life grant from the Office on Violence Against Women. And so in 2011, we were able to start an elder abuse program. Thankfully, because we've seen the need, and we're seeing this need continue to grow each year, we've been able to continue that program. We received another grant in 2018. We actually just reapplied for another continuation grant that we won't find out till September if we received it or not. But we have been able to maintain this program because we see such a need to provide these services. So today I'm going to be talking about the elder abuse and prevention. And I have some training goals that I'm hoping that everyone listening will be able to meet by the end of this presentation. So first, I want everyone to recognize what ageism is, be able to define elder abuse and know the warning signs, understand abuser tactics and justifications, and then ways to prevent elder abuse. And as we go along, I will probably just keep going, but if somebody has a question, please feel free to jump in and ask a question if you want to. So as Tina mentioned earlier, I do the stats and I do a lot of our grant reporting. So you are going to get some stats because I appreciate statistics and I like different, so you'll get some of this today. So Canyon County estimated population right now is about little under 250,000 people. And so 14% of those are adults aged 65 or older. There's a study that basically is saying older adults is actually projected to nearly double from 52 million, which was in 2018, to almost 95 million in 2060. So we are seeing our older populations living longer, and that number is going to continue to rise. This other study I found very fascinating. So for the first time, it is predicted that in 2034, older Americans will actually outnumber children. And this study was really interesting. There were some reasons that I put here why that was. One was declining rates of fertility, the aging of the baby boom generation, all has contributed to the increased number of older adults nationwide. So there's societal influences on aging. So ageism is a prejudice against an older person, discrimination, or stereotype based on age. And so I want to read a couple quotes that I want to talk a little bit about. The first one comes from the World Health Organization, and it says, ageism is most rampant in high-income countries like the United States. Americans as a whole place great value on youth, beauty, vitality, and the ability to earn a large income. Aging is sadly often seen as a debilitating process that robs people of these high-prized attributes. Another quote that I wanted to read comes from research by Yale School of Public Health. And they found a striking link between ageism in early life and poor health later on. When younger people talk about seniors as a burden, they make ugly jokes about physical changes of aging or hold unflattering stereotypes of the worth of older people. They reduce their own chances of healthy aging. And then finally, there was another study that I saw that said that 70% of older Americans said they had been insulted or mistreated because of their age. And so I want to pause here for just a moment, and I want everyone to think about, what are your own beliefs and ideas around aging? Do you buy into what our society is saying, that aging is a debilitating process? Because we get that when we open our social media or we're watching TV, Hollywood, we see that everyone wants to be younger. They want to, you know, you don't have to go very far to see to be able to get aging products to, to stop the aging process. So it's really hard in our society because we really don't value the elders and the aging process. And so it's really important to talk about this and to stop and see, what do you believe? Because what you believe about aging and the aging population is going to affect how you think and treat elder people. Approximately 1 in 10 Americans aged 60 plus have experienced some form of elder abuse. It is estimated that only 1 in 24 cases of elder abuse is actually reported to authorities. And I would say that this is underreported because there are several reasons why people don't want to report to authorities. Some of them could be shame. They may be embarrassed that maybe they were taken advantage of. A lot of times they don't want to be a burden on others. They may be dependent on somebody, on an abuser that is caring for them. And sometimes they're in a situation where they just are not able to report. Financial exploitation are cases that we're seeing more and more of every year. The annual loss is estimated to be around 36.5 billion. There's a lot of different numbers and different studies out there, but it is a huge number. And this greatly impacts those that have been financially abused. And then I found this statistic very interesting. It says elders who have been abused have a 300% higher risk of death when compared to those who have not been mistreated. So I would say, in addition to early death, the trauma of elder abuse results in health issues. It could result in hospitalizations, clinical issues such as depression, suicide, social issues, so like disrupted relationships, and obviously financial loss, which all lead to a diminished independence and quality of life. So what is elder abuse? The Centers for Disease and Control Prevention defines it as an intentional act or a failure to act that causes or creates a risk of harm to an older adult. There are several types of abuses that we're actually going to go into more detail about. But often I see these forms of abuse, they're co-occurring. So if somebody is experiencing physical abuse, they may be experiencing emotional and psychological abuse at the same time. Elder abuse affects every segment of society. So it doesn't matter what class you're in, what your race is, the ethnicity, or your social background, it affects everyone. Elder abuse age can vary from state to state depending on state statutes and laws. Here in Idaho, we have a vulnerable adult statute, so we don't have an age on elder abuse, which there's a lot of debate whether or not that's good or bad. Both Oregon and Utah, some of our neighboring states, they have the age of 65 and older in their statute. So where in Idaho, you have to be a vulnerable adult and you have to be 18 and older in order for adult protection to go out and do an investigation. Elder abuse can happen to any gender identity. Most of the victims we serve here at the Justice Center are women, but we also do serve quite a few men. And today, when we're talking about elder abuse, we're going to be talking about those that there is a relationship. The victim knows the abuser, and there's this relationship where there's an expectation of trust. So we don't see a lot of cases where there's abuse from a stranger. I know there are lots of people being abused from the scams that is somebody overseas that's taking their money. We see those every once in a while, but today we're going to be focusing more on those with a relationship. And then likely targets for abuse are older adults that have no family or friends nearby, so they're very isolated. Those with disabilities, those with memory problems, dementia, Alzheimer's, and those that depend on others for help with daily activities. So the National Council on Aging shows that nearly half of those with dementia experience abuse. This is the power and control wheel. So the abuse in later life power and control wheel. It was adapted from the domestic violence power and control wheel. And so I don't know if you're very familiar with that, but it looks fairly similar. And just like in domestic violence, that power and control is in the center of the wheel. That's where another person is using specific tactics to gain that control and power over another person. We like to use this wheel when we meet with clients to kind of find out where are areas that maybe they're being exploited, and really to try to understand the abuse they're going through. As you can see, there's the emotional abuse and the psychological abuse are the posts that run through it. So emotional abuse is that name calling, the yelling, the verbal attacks, where the psychological abuse is more that ongoing manipulative, crazy making behavior. So that's where an abuser may hide an item. So for example, maybe medication or keys, and they are going to hide it, even though the victim put it somewhere, and then they're going to ask, where is that? And they're going to try to get the victim to believe that they don't know where their medication, that they're maybe having memory problems. And so we call that the crazy making psychological abuse behavior. As you can see in the circle, there's also other areas that abusers may target. So like, for example, targets the vulnerabilities and neglects. So they may take advantage of a victim that maybe needs to use a walker or some kind of assistant device. So they may just put that walker always just out of reach so the person can't reach it, or when they get up, they're unstable, so they're not able to get it. They may also, if there's a victim, if their first language is not English, they may not be willing to translate materials, into their language. So that's where they might target certain vulnerabilities. They may also deny spiritual access. So for example, if an abuser is their way to get around town, they may say, I'm not going to take you to church or to church activities. They may also ridicule or demean a person's culture and practices. So as you can see, there's several different categories on this wheel that is really beneficial to go over with the victim to kind of see, where is abuse happening? We're now going to talk about the specific types of abuse. So the first one is physical abuse. So oftentimes in physical abuse, there's going to be physical signs of mistreatment. So that could be bruises, bone fractures, cuts. It could be untreated injuries in various stages of healing. Oftentimes, somebody may have increased hospitalizations. There may also be unexplained injuries. So there may be a bruise or an injury that doesn't really match the explanation given. There also may be a sudden change in an older adult's behavior. So they may all of a sudden seem depressed or anxious. They may appear over or under medicated. And you may also see a caregiver's refusal to allow visitors. So the caregiver might make excuses why somebody can't visit them. They may isolate the victim from friends and family. They may try to hide injuries. It might be really hot outside, but they're making the victim wear long sleeves to hide bruising or injuries. So it's really important, if we recognize any of these signs or red flags, that we are talking to the victim, that we're speaking to them alone, away from caregivers or anyone else, and that we're asking questions. And one of the attachments that will be on the slide is it gives you a bunch of questions. So there's direct questions, indirect questions, things that you can observe. And so I'm going to go over a couple of those with each type of abuse, but you can look more fully on that. But it's a great way to talk to victims and find out what's going on. So some things you might want to ask is, is someone making you feel unsafe? Have you been hurt? Does someone help you with your medications? And something that you might want to observe is the older adult's caregiver or family member, are they answering all the questions for them or talking for the victim? So again, we want to make sure that we're talking to the victim alone and that we're identifying these different signs. And if we think this is going on, we need to address it. One example that we had last year was an older lady. We got a call from actually the police department. She had gone in to see the doctor. She was going to have knee surgery. And the doctor noticed that she had bruising up and down her legs. And so the doctor asked her about, how did that happen? And she said, well, my husband, he taps me with his cane. Her and her husband were both in their 80s. And he was doing a lot more than just tapping. He was obviously significantly hitting her with the cane because it left significant bruises. Law enforcement did get involved and she was able to get away from him, but only for a short time. She did not want to go through with the protection order. She had been married to him for over 60 years. And so really, this is all she knew. And so she very much was minimizing what had happened to her. Her husband was extremely abusive to their children. The children, actually, all adults now, want absolutely nothing to do with the dad. And only the daughter is the only one that would really have any contact with the mother. And so really a hard situation because she wanted to go back. And we knew that it was putting her back at risk. And so we tried to do the best we could to safety plan her being back in the home. So talking to other family members, having people check in on her, because we knew when she was home, he would take her purse, he would take her phone. So she really had no access to get help other than if people came by to see her. And so we really encouraged that. Sexual abuse. So in sexual abuse, there's going to be physical signs that it's happened. So there may be bruising, abrasions, there may be unexplained sexually transmitted diseases or infections. There may be incontinence or blood or blood on the sheets or on an adult's clothing. There are also changes in an older adult's demeanor. So somebody might all of a sudden be becoming, showing fear or becoming withdrawn, especially when a specific person is around. They may have increased anxiety or depression. There may be sleep disturbances. They may be agitated, restless. And oftentimes they have feelings of shame and guilt and really a mindset that no one will believe them. And so it's so important that we are talking about sexual abuse with elders. I would say that sexual assault on elders is probably one of the most unreported abuse that takes place. I have seen cases, and I know it's happening in our facilities. It's happening in our certified family homes. It's happening in elders' own homes. And so it's so important that we talk about sexual abuse and make people aware of it. So that way, if it does happen, people can report it and get the help they need. So if you think that someone may be experiencing sexual abuse, some of the things you can ask is someone forcing you to do things you don't want to? Does anyone touch you without their consent, without your consent? Do you feel uncomfortable with a family member or caregiver? And so again, it's so important that we're talking about sexual abuse so that if it happens, people can report it. Emotional and psychological abuse. With emotional and psychological abuse, often we see withdrawn behavior. So this may be somebody who was pretty active in daily life, and now all of a sudden they're really withdrawn. They may have emotional distress or feel agitated. There may be changes in sleeping patterns or eating habits. So maybe all of a sudden this is somebody who was well kept and always looked nice, and now it seems like they lack self-care. There may be physical decline. Often we see depression, anxiety, so that emotional distress, loneliness, isolation, feelings of shame and guilt, often a loss of self-esteem, feelings of despair or a sense of worthlessness. Oftentimes with emotional and psychological abuse, sometimes it can be more damaging than any other type of abuse because it's constant. Oftentimes people have been so emotionally abused that they start believing what they are being told. And so it's, again, so important that we're asking questions. So some of the things you could ask is, does anyone scold, threaten, or yell at you? Are you afraid of a certain person? And then you can kind of indirectly ask, tell me more about your friends, tell me more about your family, tell me more about the caregiver, to find out more details. So I worked with an older lady who, her daughter and her family were struggling financially. And so she had her daughter and her 2 grandkids and her son-in-law move in with her. And they had come up with an agreement that they were going to pay, I think it was utilities, which did occur for a couple months. But then after a couple months, they stopped paying. And it was a couple years later that I was connected with her. Her daughter used emotional and psychological abuse against her. The mother felt like a prisoner in her own home. She said when she was there, she literally would try to lock herself in her room because if she was out in the kitchen, if she was out where her daughter constantly belittled, constantly getting on her, constantly telling her how horrible of a person she was. We eventually were able to help this lady get connected with Idaho Legal Aid, who was able to help with an eviction of the daughter. And we were able to help her get into counseling as well, because the emotional abuse was so extensive. The counseling actually was super helpful for her. The daughter and her family was evicted, and so she did get her home back. But her daughter, in trying to control the situation, now does not allow her to see her grandchildren. So these are really hard and tough situations. And so when we're working with victims that may seem like on the fence, because she debated for a long time because she didn't want to lose that relationship with her grandchildren. But yes.
Alyssa, I just had a question on this one.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you help someone identify if it's emotional abuse or if it's not, right? Is there a process that you help them through? Because I think some people, this one's a really clear case, right?
Yes.
But I've seen cases where I've actually had clients where the elder believed they were being abused, but it really wasn't a case of emotional abuse. There was a cognitive issue and a perceptual issue. So what do you recommend for people in sorting through that? Is it emotional abuse or isn't it?
That's really hard to do. And so I have seen that with clients that maybe have some memory issues, starting to get dementia. Yeah. It's really trying to do some groundwork and figure out what's going on with the situation. So trying to connect with other people and other, if they're involved with any other services, trying to connect with them, doing that collaboration work to find out, is this person really a victim? If they really are a victim, oftentimes there's other type of abuses going on as well.
And who would you recommend that, I mean, would they call Nampa Family Justice Center, or what kind of resource might somebody reach out to kind of do that assessment of, is it or isn't it abuse?
They are more than welcome to call our agency. But I think it's just trying to, like I said, you do a little investigation work, trying to figure out, what's really going on. We've helped individuals actually get into doing some cognitive testing just because there was concern. So that's a really hard issue and sometimes really hard to distinguish.
Well, and it can be just as damaging on the other side too, where, I mean, I don't want to minimize this at all, but I have seen it on the other side where someone was accused of abuse by an individual who was, had some cognitive impairment. And it was just like a child abuse case. I've seen it with children too, where somebody says they saw something and it turns out it wasn't, right? It's the same kind of, it requires due diligence to do no harm on both sides, because there can be harm on both sides if you're not cautious. So it's really tricky. This one's hard.
It is really hard. Yep. And we definitely come across some of those cases as well, where we're trying to figure out who really is the victim in this situation.
Right. Because the caregiver may be the victim, actually, in some cases. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And then the final thing about emotional psychological abuse is if you're witnessing a caregiver controlling or maybe isolating an older adult, that may be a red flag as well. So in neglect, we often will see neglect more when it's somebody that's dependent on a caregiver. So signs that you might see is that dehydration, malnutrition, untreated bed sores, poor personal hygiene. Sometimes there's unattended or untreated health problems. If there's a declining or poor health or poor physical health. Oftentimes we'll see hazardous or unsafe living conditions. So we might see where they have no heat or running water. Maybe there's soiled bedding. Sometimes we even see if there may be lice on the person. They may be having inadequate clothing. And oftentimes we'll see psychological distress and depression, which is really a lower quality of life, and that it can also increase disability and mortality. And so it's really important, again, that we're asking questions. So things we could ask are, who prepares your food? Is anyone else living in your home? And how's that going? Who makes decisions about your life? Who do you call if you need something? And then things that we need to observe is, what does their home look like? What does their home smell like? One example of a family that we worked with was a lady who was really concerned about her father. Her brother had moved in with him, and basically he would not allow the father to see the daughter. So the son was monopolizing the situation. He pretty much trashed the home. He brought in his dogs, so there was dog feces everywhere. The dad really needed a walker to get around because he could fall fairly easily. There was large piles of trash, and again, like the dog feces. So it really was an unsafe environment for him. And when the daughter would try to go and see him or try to help, the brother would isolate the dad more. He would tell the dad that his sister just wanted to harm him. And so the dad, starting to have memory issues, started to be fearful of her, thinking that the son was trying to protect him, but really he was taking advantage and really not meeting his needs. The son would drop the dad off at a doctor's appointment and not come back for 5 or 6 hours later. So really not taking the care that he needed for the father. And eventually we were able to help get the father out of that situation and into a safe place. But it took a lot of times, and there was a lot of hurdles that I had to go through. So with neglect, again, we want to be asking questions and find out more about the situation to see if we need to step in and help. Financial exploitation. We might see sudden changes in a bank account. We might see a change in a will or other financial documents. There may be unexplained, all of a sudden, a large withdrawal of money. People using an older adult's ATM card. They may be forging signatures. There's also the unexplained disappearance of funds or valuable possessions. So all of a sudden there's forged signatures for titles of older adults' possessions. So example, like a car or a house gets transferred to someone else. And again, the unexplained sudden transfer of assets to maybe a family member or somebody else. Again, that could be titles. It could be different documents. We also often will see that there's unpaid bills and sometimes even an eviction proceeding when that person has always been able to financially pay their bills. And so all of a sudden now they're not able to. With financial exploitation, we see a lot of depression, anxiety, and sleep disturbances. There is loneliness, suicide. I worked a case where a client actually did try to attempt suicide because of the situation. He had been evicted from his home because a younger woman who paid attention to him and told him that she loved him, pretty much, got him to believe that and started taking his money. And it wasn't until he was broke and losing his home that she left. She was out of there, and he was so embarrassed to call up one of his children to tell him that he had lost most of his finances. And so his answer to that was to try to commit suicide. Thankfully, it was unsuccessful, and we were able to get him connected with his children, and he was able to get to a safe place. But it was heartbreaking because he was extremely embarrassed and ashamed of what had happened to him. Another example that we had was there was an older lady who she was living by herself, and she was starting to have dementia, but she presented herself very well, and she was not able to drive. And so she would call the taxi service to come and pick her up and bring her to different appointments. Well, one of the taxi drivers kind of picked up on that, she had some memory issues. And so he started connecting with her and saying, well, if you need a ride, just call me directly. And he started spending a lot of time with her. And what he was doing was he was having her go to her bank and withdraw large sums of money, and he was taking the money from her. Well, thankfully, the neighbors got kind of suspicious about what was going on, and they called her daughter. But the daughter would call, and the mom would actually hang up on her because this taxi driver was telling her that her daughter was going to, was this evil person and wanted to hurt her. And so she was being influenced by this taxi driver. And so eventually we were able to help get law enforcement involved. They were able to charge him, but it was only a misdemeanor because it was cash and was harder to prove. So that would be an example of, it was a stranger that saw her as being vulnerable and decided to take advantage. We get those cases every once in a while, and that one was fairly interesting. I want to take a minute and talk about undue influence. So undue influence occurs when a person persuades someone to make certain decisions. So that person has a considerable amount of power over that person, and they can wield it in a very convincing way. So there are certain things to determine if undue influence occurs. The first is the vulnerability of the victim. So things that we're looking at are, are they incapacitated? Do they have an illness, a disability, an injury? What is their age? What is their education? Do they have impaired cognitive function? Are they emotionally distressed? Are they isolated? Are they dependent on the influencer? We also are looking at is the influence of parent authority. So this may include, somebody that has authority in that person's life. So maybe they're a family member or a care provider, or maybe they're a legal professional or a healthcare professional, a spiritual advisor, or some kind of expert. Do they have some type of qualification that they're working with this individual? And then thirdly, we're looking at is the actions or tactics used by the influencer. So are they controlling the necessities of life? So do they control medication for the victim? Do they control the victim's interaction with others? Do they have access to information about the victim? Do they control the victim's sleep? Do they use affection or intimidation or coercion? And then also the initiation of changes in the person's property or rights. So is there secrecy in, so have they transferred money and they've done it in secret? Is it at an appropriate time or appropriate place? And then the claims of an expertise in affecting the change. So basically, if somebody has had undue influence, it actually can be charged. California has a really cool tool. It's the Undue Influence screening tool. And so if you are concerned that somebody may have been under, could be, was undue influence, this tool is great to use to determine. One example that I'll share, this is actually not a case I had, but it was a case I heard about, was there was a daughter living with her father, and he was in his 80s, he was in very poor health. And so she convinced him that she was going to care for him. And basically she said that she needed $8,000 a month to care for him. She would not allow her siblings to visit their father. She would say he's too ill, he's too weak to receive visitors. But then she would tell her father that nobody else is there to help her. She's the only one that cares. And so they never did visit. And then she would threaten him as well. Like, if it wasn't for me, you'd be in a nursing home. So after the father died, it was learned that the daughter had the father change his will, leaving the family home to her as well as all his stocks and bank accounts. Well, the siblings were furious and they contested the will. So a jury did find that undue influence had taken place, and then the money was split evenly between siblings. So that's an example of undue influence. Her influence affected decisions that the father had made because of her position of taking care of him and what she was persuading him. So who abuses elders? Oftentimes we see it's a spouse, a partner, sons, daughters, grandchildren, children, acquaintances, caregivers, strangers. Again, strangers are the most rare. We may have an image in our head of what an abuser looks like, but maybe it's someone that we think looks angry or mean, or they've had a rough life, or they're on drugs. But remember, in elder abuse, there's often a relationship with an expectation of trust. So abusers often present well, they seem caring and nurturing, and sometimes are not who we expect. Abusers will justify their behavior. They will lie. they will manipulate, they will charm, they will justify why their behavior. So for example, if they say, I have a problem with my temper, that, I just have an anger issue, or I was drunk, I have a substance abuse issue. I'm sick, it's not my fault. Maybe they claim they have mental health issues, or they are too difficult to care for. They have caregiver stress. Often they will blame the victim and others. They'll say they're clumsy. It was only an accident that they fell. They didn't do what I wanted. So it's the victim's behavior that's the issue, not mine. They started it. There's mutual abuse. And I've heard this one before. They hit me when I was a child. This was a behavior I learned from them. Abuse and caregiver stress. So caregiver stress is a real thing, and there are a lot of services and support groups for those that are caring for loved ones or individuals. And so it can become very stressful when you're in that caregiving role. It can be exhausting, but for most caregivers, so everyone experiences stress, but most do not abuse older adults. The other thing is, when there is elder abuse going on, the victim is the target, it's not others. And oftentimes, caregiver stress is used as an excuse to manipulate professionals and gain sympathy. So why is it so important to understand abuser tactics? If abusers are believed without further investigation, there are possible dangers for victims. Oftentimes, victim safety is not addressed. This may be the only opportunity to talk with the victim. Victims may not reach out for help again. If they didn't get any help the first time, they may not want to call police, or they may not want to call Adult Protective Services, or call somebody else. If they're not going to get help, they may not believe that they're going to get the help if they reach out again. Abusers may not be held accountable for what for their actions and their behaviors. And then remedies to reduce stress, anger, or substance abuse do not deal with the power and control dynamics that we talked about earlier when we talked about the power and control wheel. There are several reasons why older victims will often stay in an abusive relationship. And some of those are personal values. So often there's love for an adult child. They're not wanting to see the child go to prison or live on the streets. I see this so often with older women who have their adult sons living with them, or son. And oftentimes I have to provide resources for the son because they don't want that person to be homeless. They don't want that person to get in trouble with law enforcement. And honestly, they have a love for that child. They honestly just want the abuse to stop. Oftentimes there's family values and commitments to a spouse or a partner, maybe to children. In the physical abuse example I gave you, the lady, she said she had been married to him over 60 years. So she had a commitment and didn't want to disturb that. So we see that often. There's also a belief that the perpetrator will change. There's also a belief that sometimes it's safer for a victim to remain with the abuser than leave. We see this often when the abuser has threatened to maybe hurt or harm other family members or friends. So the victim will end up staying in the situation because they don't want anyone else hurt because of them. There's also a belief that if the abuser receives help, the abuse will end. And I will tell you, again, I've given lots of resources out to help abusers. We don't serve abusers here at the Justice Center, but I will give them resources to victims to give to their sons or whoever it is that's doing the abusing. But the sad thing is they have to want the help, and very few actually want the help and want to change. So other reasons victim will stay is because abuser tactics. There's threatened violence if the victim leaves, or they threaten suicide or homicide. I worked with a lady whose son had threatened suicide several times if she kicked him out of the home. And she told me that she's like, I cannot have that on my conscience if he were to commit suicide. And so she allowed him to continue to stay. Oftentimes they're blamed, and there's guilt and justification to get a victim to stay in a situation. Manipulation, the victim, to get the victim to believe they cannot make it on their own, that they need the abuser, that they're dependent, and this abuser needs to stay in their life. And then a lot of times we see people isolated. So abusers will isolate them from family, friends, and any support systems that they have. And so it's so important that we can reconnect those that have been in abusive relationships to other people so that they're no longer isolated. There may also be societal influences of why an older victim may stay in a relationship that's abusive. Especially here in Idaho right now, in the Canyon County area and the Boise area, housing is so expensive. And a lot of our older adults that we're working with, they're not going to be able to afford even to rent something. And so if they have the abuser living with them, maybe paying part of the rent, that might be a barrier for them to getting out of that situation. There's also lack of system response and collaboration. Oftentimes we see the isolation of seniors in our society. COVID did not help the situation at all, of the isolation. We see this so often with most of our victims that are being abused. There's also racism, ageism, which we talked about, and sexism. Limited financial options. A lot of our older adults are on limited income. And so they may not be able to afford to be out on their own. And then lack of options for help for perpetrators. So again, for those that want help for the perpetrator and there's not help. And so instead of having them, kicking them out of their home, they're allowing them to stay. So how can we prevent elder abuse? It's so important that we take a victim-centered approach. So when we're working with victims, we need to look at their strengths and we need to look at their natural supports. We also need to respect their confidentiality and privacy. I worked with one victim who it wasn't until my third appointment with her that she finally told me her first name. But she was so scared that somebody would find out that she was getting help at the Justice Center. And so she, I made sure I went over our confidentiality policy. We do that with every client we serve, but making sure that they recognize that this is confidential. We're not going to share this information. And the one thing that we can do here at the Justice Center, being more in the advocate role, is if they report, we don't have to report it to law enforcement unless they are a vulnerable adult. And so for them to know that, oftentimes they will share things that they may not share with APS or law enforcement. Of course, we're going to encourage them to make a report, but because of confidentiality, we don't have to share that. It's also so important that we keep focus on victim safety and offender accountability. So we always want to center around victim safety, whether they are staying in a situation or they're fleeing or we're helping them transition out, we always want to keep victim safety in mind. It's also really important that we avoid assumptions about what is best for them, because we have to respect what they want for their life. We also need to take direction from the victim. You know, what do they want to see their future look like? And then finally, we need to work collaboratively to overcome barriers and obstacles. So often I see agencies working in their own silo, in their own lane. And if we would just work together, we could do so much more. And so it's so important that we work collaboratively with other agencies. Some tips for working with older victims. We really need to understand that these are very difficult decisions. We need to respect the victim's decisions that they make. We may not think that that's the best decision they should make, but it's not for us. They need to decide what they want, and we need to empower them to make those decisions. We also need to support them. It's easy to fall into the trap of blaming the victim, and instead we need to be supportive of what they choose and what they want. It's also important to expect that they may want contact with family or partners that are abusing them. So how can we safety plan with them to maybe do it correctly or rather safely? So one of the things that when we safety plan, you know, we might have them come up with a code word that if they were to call a neighbor or their, you know, a supportive person, if they said this word, they would know that they need help in that moment. And so we do a lot of safety planning around what the victims want. We also need to recognize that making major life changes, it takes time and it's a process. And so one of the things we do here was we try not to rush people to make decisions, try not to rush them to, you know, have only an hour appointment. I've had appointments that have lasted several hours because I want them to think about what they're doing. I want them to make those decisions. It's also, again, that back to that collaboration, working with other professionals really can help us understand victim choices. So what can you do? It's so important that we take time from our busy schedules and listen to older adults. We need to try to understand the challenges they're facing and always provide support. It's also so important that we report abuse or suspected abuse. So in Idaho, in our statute, we would call in and to Adult Protective Services to report abuse. So for myself, a mandated reporter, it would be due to like my profession. I have a duty, a legal duty to report suspected maltreatment of a vulnerable adult. Again, the person has to be vulnerable for us to report it. I would also say that you can also call law enforcement. So if Adult Protective Services comes out and does not find the individual vulnerable, unfortunately, they aren't able to do an investigation, where at least law enforcement might be able to do a welfare check. And so we often try to get law enforcement involved when we can. And then also, we need to educate not only ourselves, but others on how to recognize and report elder abuse. We also can check in with older adults, especially maybe those that might be isolated. Maybe they don't have family close by, or they have very few supportive services. So it's really important that if we're noticing people that are isolated, older adults, that we're taking the time to check in on them. We also need to engage elders in our communities, in our churches, in our organizations. So we need to offer services and activities specifically for older adults so they can get involved. Because again, older adults that are often isolated, are more likely to be taken advantage of or abused. And then also we need to plan. We need to take time to talk to older adults in our life about their preferences. You know, what do they want their future to look like? When we take that time and we talk about preferences and maybe even write them down, it can save a lot of heartache later on when things are planned out and if you know someone's wishes. We can also refer cases to a multidisciplinary team. Here at the Justice Center, we host the Canyon County Multidisciplinary Team. We actually will be having a meeting on Thursday, so we meet once a month. And a multidisciplinary team is a group of dedicated professionals who come together to review complex elder abuse cases. Our goal is to improve outcomes, improve safety and security for elders, and really to increase the accountability for offenders. So if you are working a case or you notice that, hey, this is going on and you want other people to be involved and to try to work through things, we ask that you would refer them to the Justice Center. You can call that number and ask to speak to an elder advocate. And one of the things that about our MDT, as you see on the picture, there's several different agencies and we're all working together to really talk about these cases and how can we improve outcomes and how can we help victims. So as you can see, it's law enforcement. We have Adult Protective Services, we have Department of Health and Welfare, we have mental health, we have victim services. So we have all of these agencies coming together. And what I've seen is I truly believe that working together with other agencies provides solutions. I only know what I know, but by having input from other agencies and getting different perspectives, it has taught me so much. Plus, I don't need to know all the resources because I have people on my team that I can count on and they're experts in their field. So if I need something, I can call them up and ask them. In our MDT, we've had some really good outcomes. A lot of the cases ended up not being criminal, which sometimes can be frustrating because we want to see justice. But we have been able to offer wraparound services and resources to support victims and to help keep them safe. So in the end, it is the safety of victims is why we do what we do. And so if you have a case and want to refer to our MDT, we'd love to be able to staff that. You can also get involved with our coordinated community response team, or we like to call it our elder abuse task force. Unlike the MDT, which is staffing cases, this is a team of professionals who identify current system responses and service gaps for older victims. So really our goal is to create a seamless response to the needs of older victims. And some of the ways we want to do that is we want to improve policies, procedures, and best practices. So for example, looking at our vulnerable adult statute, is that working or is that really not working? Is there some things that we need to try to change? We also talk a lot about education and outreach. So how do we train banks and care providers on elder abuse or financial exploitation? We also leverage resources, which reduces duplication of services, and it really does save money. We want to increase victim safety. So how are ways that we can do this as a team? And then we want to hold offenders accountable. So again, how are ways we can do this? What is lacking in our community right now? Are there ways that we can hold offenders more accountable? So right now, we're really trying to build up this team. With COVID, we lost several members and lots of staff turnover. So if this is something you're interested in being a part of a coordinated community response team, or if you know of somebody who has a passion for elder abuse prevention and older adults' rights, we would love for you to be a part of this task force. If you know of anyone who's maybe a retired professional that worked with elder abuse or in the older adult field, we would love to have different professionals on this team so we can build it up and actually do more things because we know time is so limited for so many individuals. And then finally, it's so important that we raise awareness. So at the Justice Center this month, as most of you know, it's Elder Abuse Awareness Month. And so we have several activities that are going on. We are also, for the first time ever, going to be doing an elder walk. And this walk is called the Lean on Me Walk. Together we can prevent elder abuse. And it will be held on June 24th at 1 o'clock. We will start walking from the Nampa Family Justice Center. We're going to walk down to the Nampa Library, where at the end, we're going to have some live music. We're going to have speakers. We're going to have some resources for older adults, and we're going to have ice cream. And so we would love to have as many people as possible come out for this walk. And really, we want to show our community how important this topic is and that we really care about our older adults and their well-being. So if you're able to come out, we'd love to have you join us. And then finally, this is my contact information. So if somebody has questions or would like any information that I've talked about, please give me a call or send me an email. And so I guess now I will just open it up if there's any other questions. Oops.
That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, Alyssa. Dara, that's going to be a great one for the library and
Yes, it is.
sharing.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's such important information, and it's really hard to understand how to handle when you see it.
Yeah. Believe me, that's why I love having our MDT, because there's so many cases where we're trying to protect somebody, but they want to be there, and trying to get other agencies to collaborate and talk about how we can do our jobs, but even do them better.
Yeah.
Because we need to collaborate more, and really we're out there to help victims. So really it is, we use our MDT and our CCR are great resources.
Wonderful. Any other
Thank
questions? Judy in Wyoming. So we have Judy in Wyoming, and I'm just wondering, are there comparable agencies all across the country? I'm assuming there are. And how do you find them if you're in another community?
We have adult protective services. We also have the ombudsman in some of the counties, but from what I'm learning in Wyoming, it's something that's really difficult to address. And, it's the ombudsman pretty much doesn't want to do anything because of they have to have pretty good proof that it's actually going on. I don't think that is always happening, but you guys have some great ideas that I'd like to see us where I live actually pursue.
Yeah, definitely. It's unfortunately adult protective services and the ombudsman, they have limited capacity of what they can and cannot do. And so
and they're overwhelmed.
Definitely, I would say that. It's been great to have them in our building. They just came into our building actually this year. We invited them in because we wanted to build that partnership with them. We have access to a lot of resources that we can give to clients, but we really just want to build that relationship and that connection with them. So,
and I like that idea. I think that's great. We need to pursue that where I live. We're pretty backwards.
We all have work to do.
Yes.
Yeah, we do. Yes, we do.
True. Well, thank you so much, Alyssa Groen from Nampa Family Justice Center. Website is FJC Foundation of Idaho.org. So more great information on your website, Alyssa. I looked at that a little bit. So great resource. Thank you so much. And we're going to be able to share this with a wider audience and get more attention, because definitely this is important information to get out into the community. And we can all find ways, I think, to get involved somehow, some way in this circumstance. Like to also again thank our sponsors, Oasis Senior Advisors and A Mind for All Seasons, for sponsoring our current community education webinars for this spring. And all attendees will receive an email inviting them to join our mailing list and confirm your subscription to receive information about future free community education opportunities. Make sure you check your junk folder for your mailing list invitation. And we also have more upcoming events. So as you can see, we've got a full roster shifting into summer with the topics navigating your path to retirement, responding to elder financial abuse. That's an interesting facet of today's conversation. Disability support documentation solutions, starting a retirement side business, shed light on your pain, low-level light therapy, discussing the future with aging parents, and signs of a scam. So lots of really great content coming up, and we really hope to have you join us for another session. And again, thank you to Alyssa for just a really fantastic presentation. Your visuals were just really very helpful and moved it along very well. And I was really impressed with the presentation. So thank you so much. And we'll be posting the presentation to our website in the next few days. And we have lots of, yeah, thank you.
So yeah, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share. We need to be a voice for elders in our community. And so this really is an opportunity. And whenever I do get the opportunity, I will share. I don't love presenting, but you know, it has to be their voice. And so I'm willing to put myself out there. So thank you.
You did a great job.
Yeah, you did a great job for sure.
Yeah.
And we have more resources and members with expertise on our website. It's a great place to stop and look around and see the resources that Learn Idaho has. So again, thank you everyone for joining us here, and hope to see you again.